Dracula A.D. 1972? The Count is back, with an eye for London's hot pants and a taste for everything. You having a laugh? Hi guys, so before we get into it, a very quick reminder that you'll find all my other Hammer reviews in my Hammer playlist, and there will be spoilers today for this 52-year-old movie. So, this is the 7th of 9 Dracula films that Hammer did. I have previously reviewed the first 6 on the channel, albeit it's been a while since I did Scars of Dracula, the 6th film. I think part of the reason why I've been dragging my feet a little bit on these is because I really like those first 6 films. I've enjoyed every single one of them. There's not a single dud amongst them. But when I look at the plot details of some of these later ones down the stretch, I've been a little bit nervous. That there's one called Dracula and the 7 Vampires, or 7 Golden Vampires or something, which is like martial arts mixed with vampirism. Yeah, I'm very nervous about that. And I was also very nervous about this one coming into it, because the idea of Dracula in 70s London didn't immediately compute for me. I just felt really confused just even thinking about the concept, but eventually curiosity was always going to get the better of me. I was always going to watch this movie and cover it, so here we are. It was directed by Alan Gibson, who did 2 previous Hammer films, or they might have come after this one actually. He did Crescendo and Satanic Rites of Dracula, 2 films I've not seen, but I will be watching those eventually, because both of those films are on my ever-dwindling list of Hammer films that I've not yet seen. In terms of actors, we've got Lee and Cushing for this. And now, this is something that did get me a little bit excited after the initial apprehension, because this is the first time that Lee and Cushing have done a Dracula film since the original, I think. And it's great to have them both together again in one of these, and it's with them that we begin this story. So we see Dracula and Van Helsing doing battle on top of a moving carriage in the middle of the woods. We've no context as to how this started, but it kind of made me think that we've missed out on some whole other Dracula film, that maybe Hammer have got locked in the vault somewhere. How cool would that be if it suddenly popped up in 2024, a missing Dracula film with Lee and Cushing, but probably not. But eventually, the horse and carriage crashes against a tree, I think, and Van Helsing dies, Dracula dies, albeit very unconvincingly in his case. He gets like a spoke wheel inside him, and I just can't even imagine how the carriage could crash like that and somebody get a wheel in them like that, but whatever. And to cut a long story short, we then go to the 1970s. Dracula is brought back to life by one of his descendants, and there's also a Van Helsing living nearby. I think it's either the grandchild or the great-grandchild of the actual Van Helsing. This new version is of course, played by Peter Cushing and looks exactly the same. So, in 70s London, we are getting Dracula facing off against, I'll just call him Van Helsing Jr. because I can't remember his proper name. And in the middle of all this, we get a bunch of young adult characters, hip 70s kids who just happen to get mixed up in the whole thing. And I'm pleased to say I kind of liked it for the most part. I've got a few caveats, and I'll get into those, but not the train wreck that it could have been. And I'm so pleased that we haven't just gone from 6 really cool Dracula films to a really wacky and horrible one that just completely shat the bed. Clearly, the horse and carriage chase is meant to be the big set piece that grabs your attention and gets you into the movie. But for me, the scene that actually did that is one that comes a little bit further on, when we're in the 70s and we're being introduced to the kids. So I guess they're acting as groupies for some kind of punk band who have been invited to this fancy house by some snotty kid, but the parents clearly didn't expect this. They're all stood around the outside of the ballroom looking absolutely horrified while this band plays its music, and there's kids all over the place doing naughty things, and it's all very chaotic, but it's so 70s, and I think that's part of the reason why I loved it. The camera's moving around the room, showing people doing funny dances or this and that. There's a couple having sex under a table randomly. Another kid, Johnny, who turns out to be Dracula's disciple later on, he knocks over a statue just to piss off this old woman who's watching. It's very juvenile, but it got me chuckling as well. And by the end of this scene, I was so happy by what I'd seen. I think I was in a good mood for the rest of the film then. And so when the eventual bad stuff turned up, the film had built up some goodwill with me, so I didn't really mind too much. There's some good kills in this film. Caroline Munro's in this, and it feels like she dies twice, actually. The second time, so we're following a group of people in like a cafe, and they're having a casual conversation and asking about where this character is. And then suddenly we cut to Munro dead under some rubble with some kids discovering her, and it's like, whoa, I didn't expect to just cut from that scene to that. And then we go straight back to the casual, genteel conversation in the fancy cafe again. This character, I don't know who Munro's playing here, but Johnny gives an excuse to the rest of the group as to why she suddenly disappeared, and he basically says, "Oh, she's gone to Ramsgate to get some rent money off her mum. That's why she's not around all of a sudden." And I thought to myself, you couldn't get away with that now, because the price of trains these days, it probably cost you 2 weeks' rent just to get to Ramsgate. It'd make the whole endeavour completely pointless. Another kill I liked is when this one woman, she gets taken to Johnny's abode just to listen to some records and maybe get down and jiggery with it. But the implication is that she's a little bit high. She doesn't quite have her wits with her. And possibly Johnny is in this state as well. And now I like horror where people are high, drunk, they've taken something. I just think it's a really freaky thing to see people like almost looking with blurry vision, and then bad things happen to them, because it's very true to life as well. I think that's what makes it horrific, you know. I mean, we don't go down the levels of something like Nicolas Cage's Mandy in this film or anything like that, but this concept of kids taking drugs and being high on acid, it's always on the fringe of this film. And one of the characters, Jessica, she goes back to her grandfather's house, and almost straight away she's having to say, no, I wasn't out doing drugs or anything like that. It just seems to be a thing that's part of this world, this 70s version of London that we've got here. And yeah, there's lots of great 70s-ness in this. I mean, just the way people act and the places they go, the cafes they hang around in, it just really gave me the vibe of that time period. I'm very fascinated about the 70s because it's the decade that I just missed out on. Because I was born in 1980, I don't even have any memories of being a child in the 70s, whereas I do in the 80s. So the 70s for me is just out of reach when it comes to my personal memories. So I'm always a little bit fascinated to see movies like this, which absolutely wears its 70s heart on its sleeve. You know, I watch something like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from the 70s, and I don't feel that, because a film like that, it could easily be something from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and you wouldn't really be thinking of a decade when you're watching it. But Dracula A.D. 1972, you absolutely will be thinking of the 70s. So now on to some of the things that I didn't quite like. I had a very mixed relationship with the music in this film. There's an early resurrection scene where Dracula's brought back to life, and it's a very well done scene until the moment comes where the shit hits the fan and you get the impression that evil is swirling in the air and Dracula's about to come back at any moment. But then the music that comes on, it's like something out of Shaft. It's like this bouncy 70s music, and I'm thinking, what are you doing? This is meant to be like a horror scene in a dark gothic church where evil things are happening, and I feel like I'm watching Live and Let Die or something. But as the movie went on, this same music came back quite a few times, and I started to get used to it, actually, to the point where I was almost enjoying it by the end. And come the end, I was thinking, yeah, actually, mixing this music with vampire action, it's an odd fit, but just for this one film, I do kind of like the change of tone and feel, actually. So if I watched this film again tomorrow, I wonder if I might actually have a different opinion about the resurrection scene. The finale is probably the weakest part of the whole thing. For a film that is so wholeheartedly 70s throughout most of the runtime, it suddenly reverts to type for the last 15 minutes. It goes back to being a traditional Dracula film. You know, we're in a church, we've got Van Helsing and Dracula. I'm thinking to myself, why have we just turned off the 70s for the last 15 minutes or so? If you're going to be this big 70s Dracula film for like 80% of it, you might as well just be that way for all of it. Why go back to the same old for the finale? Instead of having the final battle in a dark graveyard or a church or whatever, why not have Dracula have to go to a nightclub or something, an abandoned nightclub, and then we could have the lights come on and we could see him sort of looking around trying to avoid the disco lights and things like that. It would have been funny and entertaining, and I would have loved to have seen stuff like that in this. But I'm not even sure that Dracula sees the 70s in this film. He kind of just stays in the shadows, stays in the church or the dark places away from the urban areas. I'd love to interview Dracula just after this film, actually. I'd say to him, look, were you aware that this was a 70s story set in urban London? And I think he'd probably just say something like, Well, no, I never noticed. I was in a church for most of it. I thought we were just still in Bavaria, weren't we? The characters of... the character of Van Helsing, he's a little bit problematic for me as well. He's not... it's not that Peter Cushing does anything wrong. I just think that they make him a little bit too much like the old Van Helsing in this movie. I think it would have been more interesting if he'd have been like a taxi driver, i.e. completely different from the old Van Helsing, and then suddenly this version would be thrust into the spotlight and having to find his inner hero. But as it is, it feels like this Van Helsing, the way that they've done it, is a carbon copy of the older version, to the point where it's almost been preordained for him that one day he would have to fight Dracula, having risen from the grave. You see what I did there? But yeah, it's a strange feature of this film, actually, that the stuff to do with Cushing and Lee was often my least favourite things about it. I much preferred like hanging out with the kids and seeing their stories and what they were going to get up to. It's just a shame that come the end of the film, it's like suddenly it's decided that they're not needed, because I think we've still got one or two of the kids alive by the end of the story, and yet they just seem to disappear, and the stage is then set for Cushing and Lee to have their final battle. But that wasn't what was needed for me, and especially taking it back to the same sort of 19th century battle that they were having at the beginning. You know, we're in the 70s, just finish things off in the 70s. So before we wrap up, I'll quickly show you the version of the film that I've got for this. Here is my Blu-ray copy of Dracula A.D. Sadly, it's just a completely vanilla release. There are no features whatsoever on this, not even a trailer. It's literally just the film, albeit it does look very, very good on this. But that's just the luck of the draw sometimes when it comes to features. I've got some horrendously bad films on my shelf that have lots of features. Blair Witch 2, for example. From memory, I think there's enough features on that to keep me going for a month if I was that way out. I'm not. And then I've got other films which are absolute stonewall classics that have just got very, very little on the disc for you to check out. And this is one of those. Not that this is a classic, but you get my point. Right, let's get to the bag of terror and find out what sort of score I'm going to give this. So, 1, 2, 3... 3.5 bloody axes out of 5. I did enjoy this. It was very unusual. It definitely could have done with some improvements, but I'd certainly watch it again. I'm glad that they made it. I can definitely say that. And yeah, I'm looking forward to checking out the next one, which I believe is called The Satanic Rites of Dracula. We'll see what that one has to offer for me. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.